any other designers in here? Am I the only one, or got one? Okay, so I'm going to look at you because I'm a little more comfortable talking to you yet. So I've been a graphic designer since 2007. So I've been doing design for quite a while. About 2 years ago, I made the transition over to a development career. So, like I was saying, I was definitely more comfortable talking to designers. Always been interested in development. It was something that I kind of dabbled with on the side. I was always kind of a jack of all trades in any job I've ever had. So if there was ever a weird project that somebody didn't know how to use or do, they'd go ahead and get me to do it, which is how I unfortunately got to be the PowerPoint guy at one job, which I'm really but for the most part, even if it was kind of a simple development project, they'd bring me in on it, and I would swear at my computer, and I'd fumble through it and figure it out eventually. 2 years ago, I got hooked up with my friend Thad, who started his own company called Plumb Web Strategy, and he brought me in with the opportunity to go ahead and teach me more about development, which I was really thrilled to jump in at because this is kind of something I've always thought was a little bit fun to play with. We're a small company. We're 3 people. We all work at our houses. I work at my kitchen table every day, which is really nice. I have Alexa to talk to on the side. That's about it. But I also teach on the side as well, so I can actually have real human contact other than my immediate family. Most of our clients are ad agencies here in town. We actually do development for most of the ad agencies in Omaha. So we don't have a whole lot of competition in this field, which is really nice right now. But we do a good job of keeping them very happy, which is kind of how we get new clients. We actually don't market ourselves that much. We have a website, of course. We do some social media when we remember to do it. But for the most part, our clients come in via word of mouth. So we don't really have to put ourselves out there that much. In fact, sometimes we're getting too much. It's like a fire hose, which is why Thad brought me in. Part of the reason our clients like us is we don't use WordPress themes. Ad agencies are really used to having somebody on staff that's like, yeah, I'm a developer. I put a theme on WordPress before. I can do this. Then you're designing to the theme every time. You end up with a lot of crap on the back end that isn't what you needed or isn't something that you're using, but it's really confusing. It ends up being kind of a messy process, which designers get really frustrated about. Having to design to a theme is already kind of a restriction that designers don't like to work with. So we do everything custom. We have our own custom theme that we just completely get every time we start a new project. And our clients are really appreciative of that because we get the client, or they'll ask us, hey, do we give you a theme? Do we pick it out? And then you guys build to that, and we go, no, just design it. Give us the design files, and we're going to make it look like that. And they're pretty excited about that. When I made the switch, one thing I was pretty surprised about was that it also made me a better designer. Because when you're a designer, you're not thinking as hard about content as I think a lot of designers should be. So you're kind of making it look really impressive. You're trying to make it communicate well, but you're not necessarily thinking about what the overall structure of the content should be to be clear and easily understood, or to be the most efficient. So, as a developer, you kind of pick up a lot of that knowledge and understanding where the content should be, what it does, and that actually helped me out quite a bit. So, I'm a millennial. I'm kind of a typical millennial. I haven't stuck at a job very long at all in history, so I really do want to stay with Plumb for a long time because I liked working with my buddy Thad. I started out with Clark Creative Group back in 2007, and then in 2008, all the jobs went away. So I was no longer at Clark Creative Group. I don't blame them at all. It was just a bad rap there. I went over to 1119. I worked with a guy named Donovan who was gracious enough to give me a part-time job when I needed it. And he was also really kind enough to start teaching me a little bit about front-end development. It was really, really scratching the surface level kind of stuff, but it got me kind of interested in it. And then I was lucky enough to go over to Hay Needle, which used to be a big company. It's less so now these days, where I worked with a lot of developers on a pretty regular basis. And I got really used to setting up files to go ahead and provide over to a developer, them doing some stuff to it, bringing it back, and it looked completely broken and wrong and not at all like the thing I'd made, which was really frustrating. Left there, and I went to Dakey Design, where I met my friend Thad, who is the owner of Plumb Web Strategy now. I went into a small agency experience, which I really enjoyed, but it was also incredibly stressful. So I went back to Hayneedle. And then they were bought by Jet, and then they were bought by Walmart, and then a lot of people didn't work there anymore. I was fortunate enough to escape before a lot of that happened. And throughout most of this, I've been teaching over at Metropolitan Community College. So I teach part-time. I love doing that. I get to work with students who every year get a little bit further removed from things that I understand anymore. So that's a great way to make myself feel a little older, even though I'm only 34. But the fun thing is also when I was there, just when I was starting to learn web, the guy in charge of the program asked me if I'd teach an introductory web class, which was really terrifying because I felt like I didn't really know enough. And he just said, don't worry, you're just going to know more than the students. Okay. So I got in there and I started teaching and really fumbled through it. And the amazing thing is I learned a lot from my students, which sounds really sentimental, but it's just because they were really good at breaking stuff. And I had to figure out how to fix it. Well, they were panicking, and I was trying not to look like I was panicking, and trying to figure out what the hell they'd done to this page. It's incredible the way they could figure out how to break stuff. So, when I was a full-time designer, and still am design-centric, I cared a lot about things that developers maybe don't care so much about. So, things like creating a really cool, incredible layout. Something totally unique, something that looks completely different, which may or may not always translate great to the web because user experience design gets kind of tricky when you're trying to reinvent the wheel instead of just making a button look like a damn button. Typography is one of those things that is really one of the biggest things I always fought with developers on. So that's something I spent a lot of time on as a designer. Not only picking the right font, which people kind of think that's what designers do, but getting the weight right, getting the spacing right, adjusting the leading and the tracking and the kerning, spending a lot of time and energy and effort getting that perfect. And consistency. Keeping everything nice and consistent. So I wanted everything to look like it was meant to go together if it was meant to go together. Spacing should be consistent between things. Alignment should be consistent. Using the correct colors, exactly the correct colors, between different media, right? So if it's going to look like a certain color on the screen, how do I translate that over to print and looking accurate? And I was really, really caught up on all these details. These are really important, and every time I did a design, it took a lot of energy and development into making those things just right. Then you pass it off to a developer, and it came back looking like something totally different usually. So this is why a lot of designers get frustrated with developers. You send something off to them, and sometimes they'll tell you no. Sometimes they'll say, hey, not going to work. Don't really give me a good solution. Sometimes they just say, it's not going to work. And then me as a designer who didn't really know much about code would kind of have to figure something out that would make the client happy and keep me happy, and then the developer could actually figure out how to do. Sometimes they'd change something that was really important to me. So maybe I picked a font that I really cared about, and then they went and found something free that they could use instead that they thought looked pretty close, but I spent a lot of energy picking this font, and it's exactly what the client wants and what they need. And now it's different, and it's like heavier, and it looks clunky, and then some of the headlines don't line up correctly anymore. Sometimes they just changed something because it made it a little bit easier to code. And so it helped them cut a little bit of a corner, but it changed the overall look and feel of my site. Usually they screw up my spacing. So a lot of times if I had measured something to be just so, especially breaks between headlines and the next paragraph, would be totally different than the file I'd sent over, which really pissed me off. So this erupted in a lot of arguments, a lot of bad communication, and usually this broke down to they just didn't care about the same stuff I did. They were focusing on different things, and they didn't communicate very well with me. They didn't let me know ahead of time that they were going to change this thing until I was getting the final project, and it just didn't work out for anybody. So eventually, after kind of all these situations, I did decide to change careers, and alcohol was a pretty good influence there. So I was at a party with my buddy Thad, and I had been enjoying some beverages, and he had mentioned how much work he had coming in. And I was like, fuck it, hire me, I'll come do it. You can teach me how to do it, right? And then the next day, after I was nursing a hangover, and he texts me, he goes, did you mean that? Are you serious? And that's how the conversation starts. This kind of fell into my whole thing of really liking to learn new things. It was a chance for me to do something new. It was a chance for me to not stay doing one thing and get bored. It was a chance to challenge myself, so it kind of ticked all those boxes for me. The pay for developers is a little better too, so that always helps. So, now that I'm more of a developer, things I care about, I really get excited now about like dry coding, like, hey, I made this thing work, so I only have to put it in this one spot, I don't have to repeat myself. Isn't that pretty cool? And then my wife just looks at me with a blank stare. I spend energy on doing good performance, writing my code in a way that's going to be performant. You guys probably all know there's 500 different ways you can tackle the same problem, but finding the way that uses the computer the least is always kind of a fun challenge. Making an easy backend to use. So we work 98% of the time in WordPress. Every once in a while we unfortunately have to use Drupal, and I want to pluck my eyeballs out. But usually we're in WordPress, and using ACF fields and setting up good instructions and all of that really helps us with creating a nice, easy-to-use backend for the client. The best thing I can hear from a client is when I give them a website and I ask, hey, when do you guys want to do the training? And they go, don't worry about it. We can figure it out. This is easy. And consistency. So again, trying to keep everything consistent. One page to the next, spacing is going to look the same. I'm reusing elements when I can so that everything looks and feels like it's all part of the same project. And that's also on the code side too, right? So from a developer standpoint, being able to look at your code and being able to understand, did I always use dashes or did I always use underscores? And keeping that consistent sure makes my life a whole lot easier. So, kind of like I said, my clients are mostly designers. They can be picky, they can be a pain in the ass, they can be difficult to work with. But if you kind of understand how they tick, it's not too hard to keep them happy and keep them coming back to you. So, you kind of got to care about the things they do, which as a developer can kind of be kind of tricky because you're focused on learning skills that bring you down a certain pathway of trying to solve a problem. And now you're worrying about things like typography and that sort of thing, which seems kind of erudite and kind of just nitpicky. Usually a client's going to provide a document to me that's going to be like a PSD or a sketch document or sometimes a PDF. Usually it's one of those different kinds of programs. Just measure all the stuff in there. Don't just guesstimate. Don't just round up or round down. Match the damn spacing, because they spent time and energy on it. If you change that, even if they don't say so, they're going to notice it and they're going to be pissed. And then they may or may not come back to you. Double check, triple check, font weights, font sizes, font spacing. Double check if they did spread out the letter spacing, or what they would say is tracking on there. Double check the leading. Is their type more spread out than the default? Just double and triple check these things and make sure you're using the same fonts they asked for. If not, if it's something that's going to cost a lot of money, that's just something you have to communicate up front, right? So if they're using something from typography.com because it looks gorgeous, and then you realize you got to pay like $200 to get that font, and then you have to pay like a licensing fee, show them what's available on Google Fonts for free, and then usually they're going to change their mind. Match hex colors exactly. Like this seems like a duh kind of thing, but like I've sent projects out, and then it comes back, and the colors are like kind of right, or it's like the default blue, and I'm like, fuck, buddy, look at this. Don't forget to style forms. Like designers always forget this, and then you make the contact page because they didn't mock it up, and then the contact forms all look like the default contact style. Like use their styling. And go ahead and flesh out the form. If they didn't put checkboxes in there, style a checkbox, because the client's going to go ahead and come in later and add a checkbox, and it's going to look like a default checkbox, and it's going to look wrong. So even if the designer didn't do it for them. And then This is kind of where you can kind of go above and beyond because designers aren't used to that. Add a little bit of flair in there. Transitions on hover states always like make designers really happy. Really simple animations. So I use like Lottie and Body.js, which is like a really kind of a cool thing to add really simple SVG animations. Always blows designers away. They're always super thrilled with it. Half the time because they don't even know that that's something that's easily done. So you just put something that in there, and it makes their stuff look a lot more polished, which they're not used to. They're used to it coming back looking kind of broken. Get sassy. I use CSS Variables like crazy when I get a project coming in from a client. I will take the document they gave me. I'll go through and I'll find all the colors that they're using. If they have a brand standards guide, that's even better because it's all in one spot. My favorite clients will send us like a one sheet, which will show this is what H1 looks like, H2, this is what a button color is, this is all that other stuff just on one sheet. Those are my favorite clients. But what I'll do is I'll go through the document, find the entire color palette, set CSS or SCSS variables for it. I'll go through and find all the spacing that needs to be consistent. So I'll have things, like a variable called tile padding, and a variable called header spacing, and I'll reuse that spacing over and over and over and over and over again. A lot of times what a designer will do, they'll take the spacing between a couple of elements and then they'll double it and use it for something else. And so you can set a stats variable for something and then just do little ×2 there in your CSS. It's really great. And even things like border radiuses, shadows, transitions, just all that crap that's kind of a pain to type in and you have to do it multiple times. Just set a variable for it. That way you know you can't screw it up. That way you know it's not going to be different on a different page. It's always going to be the same. Kind of fits in with that dry coding thing. And of course, anything that needs to be overall consistent. The other big thing that developers aren't always good at is like the stereotype of sitting in a dark room, hunched in front of a computer with a Mountain Dew in front of you, and not talking. I'm obviously an outlier. I like to talk a lot, but most developers don't really talk to their clients enough. They don't really run things by them when something's going to change. Just talk about it. Tell them, this isn't going to work. Just bring some options. So don't just say no. You go to them and you say, hey, it's not going to work this way. What if we did it this way? And the best way to do it is come in with like 2 or 3 or 4 options. That way they get to feel a little bit more involved in the solution. They get to say it that way. And then they feel good about it, you feel good about it, and everybody wins. Designers aren't always perfect, of course. We do make a lot of mistakes. Help them fill in the gaps. Things like responsive design. A good chunk of my clients don't actually provide a responsive design document to me, which honestly I prefer. Because that makes my life easier. Because then I got to make those decisions. I got to do it the way that's easiest for me, and it looks the best, and what I think is the best for the end client, which is going to be the user. And then it comes back to the designer, and they're super thrilled because I didn't even think about this, but it still looks good, and it still looks like my website on my phone. That's great. It's a really good chance for you to go ahead and show your chops right there and do a little bit of creative problem solving from a design perspective. When you're doing any of these, you always got to use their design rules and not yours. So even if there might be an easier way to solve a problem, when it does come down to doing a new page that maybe they didn't mock up, or breaking it down on responsive, make sure you're using their standards. Make sure it still looks like what they were trying to do. Even if it's not to your taste. One of the biggest kind of things I had to get over when my transition came was, I don't really like the way this looks. That's not how I would have done it. But this is what you want. And then, the client's always happy. If I try to do it in a way that I think is going to look the best, they're not going to be happy with that solution. The other thing is just get in early. Talk to them about a content model. Talk to them about user experience design. If you talk about these issues early on in the process, the client's going to end up being a lot more responsive to it than if you come in at the end and you're telling them to make big changes that they should have thought of from the beginning, didn't, and now they got to do more work to go ahead and get that working. And one thing that designers, by design just don't even think about is performance. Talk to them about that. Hey, this image is this big. Do you realize that's going to really hurt the performance of your page? Here's some things we could do to go ahead and adjust that. Things like, okay, you're using 14 different font weights. Do you need that? What if we cut it down to 3? That's going to make a big difference on your download speed. Usually they're going to be receptive to that. Again, mostly if you're talking about that pretty early on in the process. And a sexy backend is very important. Again, designers are used to getting a site turned over to them or one that they built themselves that has a whole bunch of extra crap in there. So clean it up. Usually what we'll do is we'll take out like ACF from the main menu so the client can't even get into that because they shouldn't be. Because of course nothing's going to work if they change something in there. So that's just something on the menu that's now gone. We'll take a lot of the options out of the menu that the designer's not going to use. So essentially they don't have enough rope to hang themselves with anymore. And it's the same thing for the client, right? If the client goes in and tries to add something that's not going to work, we try to prevent them from doing that. But we give them the flexibility and freedom to do everything that is within the scope of the original design of the site. Of course, if another developer picks it up, they can go ahead and add that in real simple. Add instructions, sounds like a basic thing, but if you have an input field that might take a little bit of complexity, like, hey, go to Google Maps and grab this part of the URL string and then go ahead and drop it in there, explain that. If you have very specific sizing requirements for your images, explain that. Tell people that. If you're going to have particular formats that you want them to use, again, just put that in the instructions. Don't just leave it for an error message to tell them, because that's really annoying. And using plugins sparingly, like I said, we kind of do everything custom. Of course, there are some plugins you got to use, like ACF and Gravity Forms, but we try to use them as sparingly as possible, not only for security reasons and all that, but also they add a bunch of crap onto the back end that, again, is one size fits all. It's really kind of confusing to look through the back end of a WordPress menu that has too much stuff on there. So if you keep those down to a minimum, they're going to be a lot happier. And it's also important just to know where they're coming from. So your designer is usually going to be caught between a rock and a hard place. They are talking to a developer who's executing for them and telling them, we can't do this, or we can do this, or maybe it'd be better if you did it this way. They're also going to be talking to a client who wants the sun and the moon and they want it cheap. And they want it yesterday. So just trying to be understanding that they are under quite a bit of pressure. They're working with pretty difficult to work with people themselves. And try to help them through that process and be kind of a positive influence. And remember that the website's part of a bigger project for them. So a lot of times the website's going to be a big part of a brand launch, a big part of another larger campaign. So if it looks a little different, and if it's something that the designer cares about, again, understand that this needs to line up with a brochure and maybe a billboard and a whole bunch of other pieces that are going to be going along with it. So they don't want things to stray from those standards. And some of the design decisions aren't theirs. There might be some really stupid stuff in there that they didn't pick because the client's daughter looked at it and told them, I don't like blue. And so now they got to have this totally looking different website that the designer doesn't really love. I designed a lot of stuff when I was a designer that I did not love, that will never be in my portfolio. Because, I just got to pay for the kids' college someday. So overall, designers and developers, the biggest thing we really care about is we want to make something cool. So whether or not you're worried about your code structure, whether or not you're worried about making it really performant, whether or not you want it to look gorgeous, whether or not you want to have really cool animations and transitions, we're really both trying to work towards the same goal together. So, kind of like I said before, I work at Plumb. This is where you can find out about us. We work mostly with agencies and designers, but we do work directly with our own clients as well on occasion. That's my thing. Anybody have any questions?
How do you correctly measure between your spacing and stuff like that?
Yeah, so totally depends on the program you're using. You can use the good old screen capture tool, and you can go ahead and just drag that guy, and it'll give you the dimensions right up next to your cursor. If you're in Photoshop or Sketch or any of those programs, I like to use the little shape tool and create a little square. That way you get width and height right there in one tool. And also, if you forgot what it was, you can go back to it and click on that square that you had sitting there and get those dimensions. So, yeah.
When you're dealing with clients, your custom website clients, how much access do you give to them to the WordPress website, and how much do you, or how much control do you
Yeah, so we don't do anything where, if they want to add a new page or anything like that, that they'd have to come to us. Like, for the most part, if it's something that that they should be able to do without asking us for help, we make that very easy for them to do. But if it's something like adding completely new functionality or anything like that, we try to keep that at least 1 degree of separation away from them, just again, because that's something a developer should be doing. And so if they're going to do it, they're going to have a developer touch it, and then it'll hopefully be done right. But that's not a whole lot of situations. Again, it's like if they wanted to add like a slider on there, we try not to make that super obvious to them how to do that. But again, like adding a new page, adding a new form, any of those kinds of things. And part of the way we like to build, and we actually just started reworking our theme to work with Gutenberg, but we like to work in sections, where we design things where it's like, okay, cool, you want to put a 3-column section in here, and then now you can go inside of there, you can put 5 different types of content that we designed out for you. And then on that section, you can put a blue background or green background or whatever. So kind of an ideal website for us when we have it done is you can just make a new page. You don't have to pick a page template and then just build it out of different sections and then picking content that goes in there. Now that we're working into Gutenberg, that's kind of how that works anyway, so we're kind of still in the process of figuring that one out.
So we're just seeing a lot of designers go with the desktop first approach.
Yeah. Very rarely am I seeing mobile first. I think it's one of those things that everybody kind of like sighs and says, yeah, no, we should. But it's still, the biggest frustration I get is, a lot of designers will still do that thing where you have to hover over something to reveal information. And then you got to remind them, like, sorry, that's not the best way to do it. But yeah, it's mostly desktop first.
You deal with SVG very much, and how do you usually handle that with WordPress?
Yeah, so WordPress has kind of been making it a little tricky lately because there's a SVG plugin where you can allow SVG graphics, but then you actually have to go in. I can't remember where it is, but there's another line of code you actually have to switch in PHP that actually allows SVG in there. If we have a client that would like to add SVG graphics, so there's just something that makes it so it's best to use SVG, we do allow them to do that. We have enough other security settings on our sites that we're not too concerned about it. We host like 90% of the sites that we do. We actually have quite a bit of requirements for passwords that we have for them. We have quite a bit of our own security on there, and we keep everything up to date, so we're not super concerned with the security aspect of having an SVG in there. So for the most part, if it's something that we think would be the best solution for it, we usually open that up.
So would you rely on a plugin, or do you hand code it?
So that's one of those things. Usually we just do a plugin still. Pretty sure there's a good way of getting around it without. We just haven't gotten into that yet. Yeah.
How do you handle theme updates with your clients? Is that like a monthly deal, or?
Yeah, so it's kind of when we get to updating our theme, and we actually have a version 2. I think we're at like 2.9.1 or something like that right now, and then our Gutenberg theme that we're doing is version 3.0. So none of the people on version 2 are going to be getting any of those 3.0 updates at all. So we've got those two kind of branched off and separate and quarantined, so they're not going to screw each other up right now. We've got a lot of, basically all of our old sites right now have that disabled Gutenberg on right now. So they'll be waiting for updates until we do a big upgrade on their site.
And you guys pretty much strictly work from that one custom template for
across
the board?
Yeah,
I'm guessing to help kind of with the streamlined updates and things like that.
Yeah, we've done a few projects where a client will come in and they go, hey, we got this theme, we really want to use it, and I want to pull my hair out.
Right.
So we use to ours.
Right.
And so a lot of people think, you're going to do a custom theme, it's going to be more expensive. But usually it's actually the opposite, because it takes us a while to figure out when they're using something like Divi or something like that, versus our theme where we crank it out because we've done it 100 times.
Yep.
So, and then, of course, it's, in our opinion, better. So.
Do you have any recommendation? What would be a recommendation for an individual who's looking to start to create relationships with more designers in order to be able to get more of that business? I know, obviously, you don't want too much competition at the moment for those who are interested.
Yep. So start going to stuff that designers like. Things like AIGA is American Institute of Graphic Arts. I think is what the AIGA comes from, but they don't call themselves that anymore. Is a design organization. They put on a lot of events. If you're part of a big enough business, you can host or you can sponsor some of those events. There's Design Alliance Omaha also has some good design events. Start going to those. Start making friends with them. When you do get that project with a client that is an ad agency, talk to them a lot. Like, get to know them, because the design community in Omaha is actually really small. I bounced around at all those jobs I put up on my second slide there because I knew people at all those places just from talking to people. So once somebody, you get to know somebody, that's your in, that's your foot in the door, you do good work for them, and then inevitably somebody else is going to go, hey, I need a website, who do you use? Hopefully they'll recommend you if you if you listen to me and followed all my easy to do steps on keeping them happy, they will recommend you. But yeah, it's, again, word of mouth, showing up to these events, putting your name out there, things like AAGA and that sort of thing.